We've been dealing on episodes concerning inheritance, child, and illegitimacy. And this will be the final episode on this series. We've been looking at issues emerging from inheritance rights and how do we bring this to a logical conclusion. My name is Philip Omo Gyupon. I still have the barrister, the custodian of the law with me that started with me on the inheritance rights, and he is Akigbe Oselwo. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mr. Philip. It's my pleasure.
Well, we have questions being raised from the last episode we presented, and we keep seeing questions being repeated anyways. But let's look at this aspect where when a man dies intestate, because a lot of issues that emanate from these challenges we are having that is generating litigations, it is because they don't do the needful in their lifetime.
Exactly.
And so when they are gone, they leave issues for the children and the family, to handle, which sometimes or mostly leads to contentions in the courts. So if a man dies intestate and the illegitimate, as the word quotes it, the illegitimate child, is he or she at the mercy of the other children before he gets anything from the inheritance of their late father?
Okay, well, you've asked the question and answered it. You spoke of illegitimate child.
Yes.
Now, if he is an illegitimate child, it means that he was not recognized by his father during his lifetime. So let me go back to the definition of legitimacy. What makes a child a legitimate child? And we tried to say that a child born during the subsistence of a valid marriage as between his father and mother, there is a presumption that his father, the deceased, is the father of the child. Now, even if the deceased was not legally married to his mother, but after the birth of that child, he subsequently contracted a marriage with the mother, then we say that the child is legitimate. The third category is where the father takes responsibility for the child, even though not married to the mother. We say the child is legitimate.
It's legitimate.
There is even a fourth one. The law creates a presumption that a child born 280 days after the death of his father or her father is deemed, and during the father and mother being in a marriage, that child is presumed to be the child of the father. Now, if two people,
that's the period of conception,
of course. So if two people go to court and then they dissolve a marriage, 280 days after the woman gives birth to a child, it is presumed that that child belongs to the father. So all these are presumptions. And remember, I also mentioned that these presumptions can be rebuttable. So if a man was in prison custody, but still lawfully married to a woman, and he did not have access within the period, you cannot say that that child is the child of the father, right? Because there was no access. And then again, in situations, so basically, the point is you cannot force a man to take ownership of a child that is not his. Once he accepts that that child is his own, then we say that that child, under these categories I've mentioned, is a legitimate child. And it is only a legitimate child that has the right of inheritance of his father's property. If he is an illegitimate child, he's a stranger. He cannot take, from that property.
Okay.
So we have cases like Francis and Francis, where the child was born within, wedlock. The court said that child is the child of the man because they were still lawfully married at that time. He had access to his mother. They were cohabiting, and so those are the presumptions the law creates in determining legitimacy.
Okay, basically here in Africa and particularly Nigeria, there seems to be this belief that once a child is born outside wedlock, then the child is termed illegitimate, irrespective of the father recognizing that child as a true child of his. And that was why I started by saying that if he now dies intestate, is it going to be at the mercy of the eldest son or the Okaigbe and elders? Because we have a case where an anonymous asked the question, and he is 42-year-old, a male who has been denied of his inheritance after the demise of the father by the other children and tag him as an illegitimate. How do you tackle such crux?
Okay, well, there is no, like I mentioned, there is no one size fits all. Each case is viewed from its own peculiar factual situation. What the onus is on that is not a child now, because you say he's 42.
Yes, a 42-year-old man.
Yes. So what the young man has, the duty that is upon him, the duty that the law imposes on him, is to show evidence that the deceased was his father. The evidence very clear. His birth certificate. I'm sure the father would have indicated that he's the father of the child. I'm sure that man, the man in question, I'm sure there's evidence that the deceased took care of him, paid his school fees, and all of that. If he provides that evidence and he is able to come before the court with that kind of evidence, the court will come to a finding that he is the legitimate child of that man.
Can photographs alone do the evidence?
Photographs in addition. So when he was born, maybe during his the naming ceremony, there were things him and the deceased did together as father and son. There are even situations where family members are aware. And then, of course, when you see the resemblance between the man and that child, it will be callous, it will be wicked to say that, oh, this child is illegitimate, when it's obvious that the man, the resemblance is there. So, again, in determining legitimacy, so if you have an African man and an African woman, giving birth to an Asian, a child that has Asian features, that already tells
that's
you
an outright
that. So the facts, when you look at the facts and you analyze the facts beyond law, it tells you already that from the evidence that this child is legitimate and the other is not. So the children at home who are trying to stop this young man from participating in the inheritance process, it makes no sense. If that evidence is available, then the bickering is unnecessary.
Okay, even if the child was born during extramarital affairs?
Yes. There are situations
because
where...
we humans are possessive in nature. We've seen cases where women will influence their children, to take over the property and never to share with anyone born out of wedlock.
So the issue of wedlock is as between the father and the mother. So if the man had an extramarital affair with a woman outside,
it doesn't affect the
it
children.
Does not affect the child. You cannot punish a child on the basis of what the father and the mother did. That child did not choose to come through that process, and the law will not permit anyone to and it's a constitutional issue. The law will not allow anyone to be deprived of any benefit based on the circumstance of his birth.
Okay.
So it's the battle, the fight is completely unnecessary. And of course, you should know that such battles are emotional, because very emotional, very serious and sensitive. So you see a situation whereby the man and the woman lived together as man and wife. The woman struggled with the man to put resources together, and then upon his demise, the woman at home hears that, oh, there's a certain son somewhere, and then of course she's going to fight that. My advice to men is simple. If you have that kind of situation, it's better for you to just lay it bare, lay it bare and make it clear.
Okay.
So that to avoid unnecessary issues when the inevitable occurs. Some of those issues were mistakes. Some of those situations were deliberate. But however it is, a child has been produced, and that child should not be allowed to suffer based on the acts of discretion or indiscretion of his parents.
Okay, still on the anonymous contributor or respondent, he also made clear about whose responsibility, to tackle issues like that. Is it the court or the palace?
Okay, so the court and the palace, yes, both, but both can resolve the issues independently, but not collectively. And I'll try to explain. So when two people come together and say they want to resolve their disputes, Mr. A and Mr. B, they have a dispute and they call a third party, an arbitrator or a mediator, to resolve that dispute. As long as they go before that, that third person to resolve their dispute, whatever finding that person comes to, they are bound by it.
Okay.
So if such a dispute arises and then both parties decide to go before the palace of the Oba of Benin, and the Oba makes a pronouncement that on the issues
as the head of the customs,
of course,
okay,
customary arbitration is binding on them.
Is binding,
yes,
as the apex,
of course. And of course, the Oba of Benin is the custodian of Benin tradition. He is the so when he makes such pronouncements, it ought to be binding.
Okay.
Don't we see situations where he makes some good judgments and then you see some people going against it. That is completely wrong. He is the custodian of the tradition.
Okay, when you say some people, do you mean even leading to litigations in court?
Of course. So you see situations where, but like I mentioned, if they came before the Oba and they agreed to come before him, they are bound by it. Now,
does the law support that?
Of course, even up to the Supreme Court. So if we go before the Oba and the Oba makes a pronouncement, as long as the pronouncement is in line with the law, there is no case of nobody was coerced, and that cannot happen in the palace of the Oba of Benin. Once they are bound, once they allow themselves to be that adjudicatory process to take place, they are bound by it. So most of these issues ought to actually be resolved in that kind of forum.
Okay, a situation where the apex court, for instance, the Supreme Court, already gave judgment in that regard, and the other one who is not, the other party who is not satisfied, now take it to the palace.
That's why I say that they work independently. Once there's a matter in court, the palace will naturally not want to get involved. The worst that can happen is they may tell the parties, if you want us to resolve this dispute, go and withdraw the matter from court, right? And then allow us to go in. But the palace will not want to usurp the position of a court of law, properly so called. But again, these disputes are majorly customary in nature. So if you go before the palace of the Oba of Benin, they will bring in, they are in a better position to determine what the custom says, so that issues of this nature are minimized.
Okay.
Right? Issues of this nature are minimized. So like you go to the regular courts, you see a lot of cases on this. And these cases could have just been resolved by a third party intervention. A third party intervention, an elder in the family, the Okaigbe, or somebody in the family. But no, we like to flex it out in the courtroom. And that takes time. Okay. You see, one of my former lecturers will say, Professor Chanu will say, litigation is like biscuit. It can break on any side. So while you feel that you can go through the process of litigation, you never can tell. You may fail, you may lose the case on some technical points. And then come to think of it, when two brothers go to court and flex muscles, it can never be the same.
Okay.
But when they go before an arbitral panel or an arbitral process, they go through an arbitral process, we come back home as a family. Rather than going to the courtroom, washing our dirty linen, stressing the process of administration of justice, some of these issues can be resolved at the level of the Palace of the Oba of Benin.
Thank you so much for your articulation on this. And in case you're just watching, it's The Law and You. And I've been speaking with the custodian of the law, Ahigbe, and we are looking at issues concerning inheritance and child illegitimacy. And this happens to be the last episode. But just in case you still have reactions, although we can't treat the reactions in the subsequent one because we'll be treating another topic which we also relate on inheritance. But maybe in subsequent editions, we could have the opportunity to flip in whatever reactions you have for now. So the number is riding on the screen as the WhatsApp number and of course the text line. So do well to respond by pouching your message or chat on the WhatsApp and text line. My name is Philip Omowo-Gyupon. We'll take a short break. Welcome back. Let's look at this issue concerning, because this is quite a burning one. You know, when I got this question, I was taken aback because I was thinking, what could be your response? A situation where a step, for instance, you know, happens to come in and wants to claim, you know, that he is a legitimate child of the stepfather, and then the other children happens to disagree with that. Where does he fall in as having rights or equal rights with the other children?
So if you call him a stepchild, I need to understand that will mean that he is a child of the deceased wife.
Of course, yes.
So not necessarily the deceased child.
No, and the only male child in the home. As the anonymous said, he has two sisters, two step-sisters, and there is an Igiogbe.
And let him go and inherit his father's property.
As in?
He has a father.
Okay, yes. Okay. Not a step.
So he cannot, you see, the process of inheritance, it goes on a straight line, horizontal.
Okay.
From father to child, you know, downward.
Okay. In that sequence.
In that line. It's not vertical.
Okay.
So he cannot just come. He has a father. If he identifies his father, he should go ahead.
Because legitimacy comes from the father's line.
The father's line, not from the mother's line. We operate a patrilineal system, not a matrilineal system. So a child takes from his father, not the other way around. So those kind of issues, for example, that looking at it, there is actually no issue there because it's obvious, it's clear. You are connected to that. You are not even connected to that man at all. No. You are only from the scenario you have created. He is only connected through his mother.
The issue where the deceased, you know, was not having an offspring, a male child, and unfortunately, I don't like to use the unfortunate. Okay, but now had female children only. What happens to the Igiobe?
Well, that created a kind of complex situation. Okay, and I'll say it in two ways. Both ways are actually arguable. So there is no one answer there's no one appropriate answer to the question. So if he does not have a male child and he has female children, the argument of the women, of the ladies, will be that they should be allowed to inherit.
Wow. The argument.
The argument of the women will be that they should be allowed to inherit.
Are there incidents, you know, about this in the court?
Of course, yes, because you know.
But has it put through successfully?
Of course, you see, in this situation, there is no male child, so there is no dispute as to who to take. If you have all women, then they take equally. They have equal rights to the property. So you cannot say, oh, the eldest female child.
Don't forget I said Igiogbe, for instance.
Yes.
I think we were taking our minds back because I remember vividly when such question was raised, and you spoke about the fact that you are making comparing with the stool of the Oba, for instance. We have never had a female Oba. So in that case, it means that a male child must ascend to the throne.
So that brings me to the second school of thought.
Okay.
The second school of thought would necessarily say that the person that can take that property should be a male, a man.
Yes.
And then you now see maybe the diseased younger brother coming forward to say he should be allowed to take the property. he should be allowed to take the property on the condition of the definition of the Igiogbe. The Igiogbe, remember we said, is the property where the deceased lived and died, where certain traditional rites take
like
place.
Ikure.
Yes, and so you continue the legacy of the deceased. But the question the poser then will be, are we sure that when this uncle will eventually take this property, he would continue that legacy? I doubt. Because in situations, you find situations where that uncle has actually been eyeing that property. And then the opportunity comes, once he steps in, he's going to sell it off.
Okay.
So the question will now be, would you rather allow the uncle take the property and sell it off?
Okay.
Or give it to the girls and allow them to do whatever they please with it?
Okay.
So that's the situation.
Let me quickly also ask you this, because we also had an anonymous, you know, who happens to be a woman, you know, who has who is the second wife, you know, of the deceased, and he has children, you know, 2 sons. But the deceased, you know, while he was in the US, you know, got married to a white lady, and they were later divorced. And so he also had children for the white lady, a son, and I think 2 female children. Now, the woman seems to be asking, does the children or the male child not have access to the property of the deceased, being that even they are American citizens, you know, happens to be white? Is that not alien to our customs?
The Igiogbe would definitely go to the first son.
Who is an American?
Who is, well, you call him an American, but his father is a Nigerian.
Who may not even come home.
The Igiogbe will naturally go to the first.
How will the elders perceive that?
The elders cannot do otherwise. Taylor and Taylor is the authority for it. Even if the Taylor and Taylor says, even if the elder surviving male child is a non-entity, even if he has some medical impediment or whatever, that property must be preserved for him. Ogiame and Ogiame, those are the authorities on the point.
Even if he's not around.
Even if he's not around, you preserve it for him. Except he says, you know, because I don't see myself. It's by his choice.
Okay.
He may decide to relinquish by choice.
Okay.
But he cannot be deprived.
Okay, quickly, let me ask this. This will be the last for this episode, the last question. A situation where a child is adopted, you know, before the father now had an offspring, a male offspring, you know, because it happens every day, you know, at the point where you'll be thinking, your age is going, you don't have a male child yet from the woman that you married, and so go adopting a child, and then in the course of it, he later had a male offspring. Does that adopted child have an equal inheritance?
Of course. The process of adoption legitimizes the child. That means that the father has said, this child is mine. You know, that was the same thing God did to us. As you know, we according to the Bible, we were sinners, and then he adopted us as his children. So that gives us an equal footing, an opportunity to inherit. So that's why we are called, I'm sorry I'm preaching, that's why we are called heirs.
It supports the issue on the ground.
Yeah, that's why we are called heirs. So you see, but these issues makes people blinded by emotions. So you are going to see some members of the family say, this is the true blood of the disease. There's nothing like true blood. The disease acknowledged that child as his. And if that adopted child came in, was adopted before the other children came in, then the so-called adopted child is the first child.
Okay, and even if the issues get to the court or the palace,
yes,
the adopted child will be recognized.
Legitimized.
Okay.
You cannot deprive him of the benefit.
Thank you so much for taking our time to articulate these various points raised by the viewers. I basically believe that you are satisfied with what has been said by Barrister Akigbe. Well, we're going to be rolling the next topic in our next edition. From Philip Omogyupo and Akigbe.
Thank you very much.
It's goodbye.